Hi there, I am Gunther Verheyen. I call myself an independent Scrum caretaker. And I want to welcome you in my home office here in Antwerp, in Belgium. Now, I'm here to answer 3 questions that were sent to me by Jerzy Cieśliński. So he's kindly asked me, hey Gunther, do you want to answer these 3 questions for me and make a little recording about it? So here we are. Let's have a look at the first one. Question 1. What encouraged you to become a Scrum Master? Actually, nothing. Because when I started with Scrum, that was back in 2003, we didn't really start with Scrum. My life of Scrum didn't start with Scrum, it started with extreme programming. And we then wrapped extreme programming practices in Scrum. So we didn't think about those things. Now, another reason why I wasn't encouraged to become a Scrum Master, because when I started with Scrum and extreme programming back in 2003, we didn't use the name Scrum either, because people didn't know what it was. We didn't use the term Agile either for the same reason, by the way. So we just started applying it. We were not focusing on roles or titles or whatever. We just started doing it. Extreme programming in a frame of Scrum. It turned out beautiful, by the way. So nothing actually encouraged me to become a Scrum Master. And I'm still not overly focused on, let's say, the roles within Scrum. My focus is the holistic framework of Scrum, which is much more than just the role. I don't like to isolate those things from the framework. They play a role in the bigger whole that we call the framework. Now, the bigger role for the Scrum Master, for me, is still beautifully described as being a servant leader. In that sense, managing an environment of Scrum, an environment that gets the best out of people, where people find their energy, their intrinsic motivation, often again, because a lot of people have lost it over the years, where they can find their intrinsic motivation, build great products, humanize their workplace, and focus on excellence. And a Scrum Master is a servant leader because the Scrum Master has no, let's say, hierarchical means to get people to do stuff. Has to entice them, tempt them, convince them, work with them, use some rhetoric to get them into doing that. And that is so beautiful about the Scrum Master. What was most difficult for you at the beginning? Now, as you might know, my life of Scrum didn't start with Scrum. It started with extreme programming, which we then wrapped in Scrum. And in those years, that was 2003, let's say until 2007, I was able to work with largely the same stable core team. And we worked in different environments, built different types of products for different types of organizations. And those years were actually not that difficult at all. And it was only after those years, around 2007, 2008, that life became very difficult for me. Now, what was, looking back, the biggest difficulty that arose by then is the fact that up to that point, I had been fortunate to work with very driven people, motivated, committed, engaged people that loved all of these things. So I didn't have to convince them about a lot of things. They just went for it. So in the beginning, it was fairly easy looking back. And then it became difficult because I started working with different people that didn't have that same intrinsic motivation, that same drive, that same engagement. And then suddenly I had to start explaining stuff. All the things that we had been doing almost implicitly, I suddenly had to put words on them, make them explicit. And the problem with intrinsic motivation is that you can't make people be intrinsically motivated, because that's not in the word. So that was, for me, very difficult. Not at the beginning, but let's say after the beginning, and still up to today. The lack of intrinsic motivation of people. That's why I call myself an independent Scrum caretaker on a journey of humanizing the workplace, because there's a lot of potential in humanizing the workplace. Is there a Scrum myth you want to deny? Now, I've got two problems with this question, and they both have to do with the word myth. I don't like all this myth debunking and whatever people would call it. And actually for two reasons. And one of the reasons is in this book. I don't know if you can read it. It's a Dutch book, by the way. It's about King Arthur. Now, I'm a big fan of King Arthur and King Arthur legends and all variations that exist of it. Now, King Arthur, we all know it's a myth. It's not a real person. We know it's a combination of stories and so on. It's a myth. So the fact that we've had all these myths that people want to take out of the world sounds silly and a little bit sad for me, because there's a lot of value often in myths, mythological stories. That they're not real stories, we know that, but they tell us something deeper about ourselves as human beings or as events that happen in our lives. So I don't like the word myth to start with. So let's call it fallacies, misunderstanding, misconceptions, whatever you want to call it. And then maybe let's open to that more. So I don't like the idea of taking away myths, because myths are very important in our lives as human beings. And the other thing that this question reminded me of, when I started compiling the book that turned out to become 97 Things Every Scrum Practitioner Should Know, there was a guy approached to help to deliver, let's say, or to write articles for books. It's called James Copley, very famous guy. And this question reminded me of what James said as a first response to my question. Do you want to contribute to the book that I'm editing? And says, yes, I would love to. And he said, I see two tasks before us as a community. And he said, one is the very rare opportunity to create new knowledge. But he called it a rare opportunity. Why? Because Scrum has been around for a long time. It's been documented. There's a Scrum, whatever, plenty of books. So creating something new insights around Scrum, he said, it's going to be fairly difficult. And I agree. There's probably a couple of things in the books anyhow. And he said the other task is, so the second task is just to clarify the current understanding of Scrum. And he said we can do that in two ways, by what he called adding texture or by correcting misunderstandings. So this is about potentially correcting misunderstandings. But what I really dislike about all those myths, whatever debunking that people go through, to be honest, it often comes across with me as very pedantic. Some sort of superiority that radiates from it. People think that I'm more superior. It reminds me of the old days, and that is about 15 years ago already, 10 to 15 years ago. Do you remember the Scrum but? Yes, you do Scrum but, very judgmental. Now, the Scrum but days are over. Scrum but has served its purpose. It was important at some point of time. I remember back in 2012 working with Ken Schroeder, and as you know, the guy behind the whole Scrum But idea, he said, you're right, Gunther, we should stop talking about Scrum But and turn it into Scrum End. Scrum has been so adopted so widely, it's not helpful to be pedantic and finger pointing about that's a myth, that is not true, and so on. Often people do it just because they want to make a big name or whatever for themselves. But is it helpful? And I don't believe it's helpful. So let me go to my choice is to bring a positive idea of what Scrum is or could be. Help people see, okay, you're doing Scrum, and this is how you're doing it, and here are better ways to potentially do it. How can I help you even more? How can I help you get more out of Scrum? And by continuously pointing out fallacies in people's understanding of Scrum, not helpful. So there is no Scrum fallacy that I really want to address. I want to help people get more out of Scrum rather than blame people for what I think they're doing wrong. So these were my 3 answers to the 3 questions that were asked by Jerzy. I hope you liked it, and thank you very much to Jerzy for asking me. Bye-bye.